It is not uncommon for parents to see their teenage children come home upset, moody, or even depressed.
According to the CDC, 1 in 5 children in the U.S. show symptoms of a mental health disorder in a given year, and nearly 80% of those who need mental health services will not receive them. While there are certainly progressions in how society views mental health and our treatment of mental illness symptoms, the sources of these problems with rising mental illness is still prevalent. What are these sources? I would argue that public education has some effect on mental illness increasing.
First, we must define some of the problems with public education. Now, there's a whole slew of problems parents have with the curriculum, for instance, but we're going to look at some things a little more closely related to mental health. The arguments that one typically uses, such as in this article by The Atlantic, in favor of public education is that reading and math scores have increased, public schools produce innovative and industrious citizens, and higher, more diverse socialization. With regards to the argument about reading and math increasing, there are several studies indicating that the average homeschooled child scores in the 65th to 89th percentile on standardized testing, while the average child in public schools scores around the 50th percentile. While there is absolutely evidence that shows improvements among 9 to 13-year-olds, especially among African American and Hispanic students, children who were homeschooled still statistically score higher. This implies that there is still much room for improvement in our classrooms. Furthermore, there is evidence suggesting that worrying about grades, especially if a student receives lower grades than others, is associated with suicidal thoughts and behaviors. While we must remind ourselves that correlation does not equal causation, when we remember that those aged 6 to 17 are reported as not receiving the mental health care they require, and we recognize that the students with lower grades are more at risk of mental illness and suicidal ideation, it would appear that these students get developmentally left behind. When it comes to producing innovative and industrious students, homeschooling also appears to beat public school. Research shows home-educated children perform typically above average in peer interaction, self-concept, leadership skills, family cohesion, participation in community service, and self-esteem. These statistics last into adulthood as well. One study revealed that homeschooled children were 66.7% more likely to graduate college, over 8% more likely than public school students. Additionally, adults who are homeschooled as children are more likely to vote and attend public meetings. The final point, having higher and more diverse socialization, is more generally accepted as the reason to send your children to public schools rather than homeschool them. This is a common stereotype that homeschooled children are more awkward and socially rejected than public school children, but once again, research proves otherwise. However, this point is the murkier of the three main arguments to decipher. Socialization is arguably one of the most important facets of school life that both parents and students look toward. According to Richard G. Medlin, expert at Stetson University, those in favor of traditional schooling argue that parents do not know the damage they're doing to children in the long run, while homeschooling parents admit to some issues like homeschooling making it harder to find playmates and friends for their children. They're not particularly worried about socialization and do not find the extra effort, such as putting their children in an extracurricular, too stressful. The data on such research tends to be a bit shaky, but what reliable research is available suggests that homeschooled students are equally as well socialized as traditionally educated students, sometimes better. However, more research on this question would help to stabilize a firmer answer. There is another topic along the lines of socialization that I believe is insurmountably important when discussing the topic of public education. Until now, this video has appeared to be an argument against public education and for homeschool. My intention with this was not to put down the accomplishments of public education, but to compare it with another variety of schooling to see how effective it really is. Using what was covered, I will now discuss how this may correlate with declining mental health among the youth. When it comes to socialization in public education, it is nearly impossible to discuss the issues that bullying causes. Bullying is defined with behaviors such as physical intimidation or harm, social exclusion, making fun of the victim, teasing, name-calling, insults, threats, property destruction, making the victim do something they don't want, or spreading rumors about the victim. More recently, cyberbullying has been added to the way students may bully one another, in which one has mean things posted about them online and on social media platforms. Adolescents and teens involved with bullying are divided into 3 groups: victims, bullies, and bully victims. Unsurprisingly, victims are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, long-term damage to self-esteem, and loneliness. It's worth noting that, according to a study done by the Secret Service, most school shooters were bullied before their attack. Bullies are at higher risk for antisocial and violent behaviors, having problems with school, abusing substances, abusing partners and children, and engaging in criminal behavior. Bully victims are those who have been bullied and bullied. They are at greater risk for both mental and behavioral problems. The rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation and behaviors are greatest among bully victims. Why did I bring up this subject? Well, as unfortunate as it is, bullying is a well-known occurrence in the experience of growing up. Everyone has been exposed to bullying, whether they went through it themselves or watched it happen on the sidelines. In recent years, public education districts have taken larger steps to prevent bullying through programs, campaigns, and policies. However, the effectiveness of these programs have been called into question several times. While many articles would like to say that they have been effective, there is evidence that says otherwise. In some cases, bullying even increases as a result of anti-bullying programs. This video by Be More Better does a decent enough job explaining why anti-bullying campaigns have been largely ineffective, comparing them with anti-drug campaigns. Due to this inefficiency, students continue to suffer long-term psychological problems throughout their lives. The same goes for mental health campaigns in schools. Often, the effectiveness of these campaigns prove fruitless. Samuel Harvey, an Australian psychiatrist, writes, "There is some evidence that mental health awareness programs can increase individuals' knowledge about mental health, but there is no convincing evidence that awareness campaigns change the things that really matter." Similar to anti-bullying campaigns, some experts, such as Professor Simon Wesley, former head of the Royal Society of Medicine, argue that mental health awareness campaigns can actually decrease mental health. He is quoted saying, "I'm really worried that we will overstretch and demoralize our mental health services if all we do is raise awareness, but don't provide more people, better circumstances, better support, and less burden of regulation." Despite all the work and effort the public education system has put in, the evidence seems to suggest that, overall, public education does worsen cases for mental illness by placing stress on students to have the best grades, reluctance towards bullying, and the exacerbation of mental illnesses. Am I arguing about some conspiracy theory that this was their plan all along? No, not in the slightest. I'm merely trying to clearly define some of the problems with public education, as most of us can agree that there are many of. So, why is the system like this? As there isn't much research on the topic, the best I can offer is, again, theory. My personal theory is that public school districts compete for the greatest cognitive development. Therefore, they place all emphasis on statistics like how high their standardized test scores are, how many of their students go immediately into college or university upon graduation, and how few students drop out. However, the cost of these focuses is the emotional and mental development of students. As we grow, life gets increasingly more difficult to handle, and the bar rises each year for the strength required of us to deal with them. Schools are clearly unprepared for the emotional and mental development of their students, as shown earlier for schools simply following the bare minimum when it comes to mental health awareness campaigns. However, I would again like to make a disclaimer that I cannot prove this theory without sufficient evidence, which should emphasize that more, higher quality research is needed in these fields, however controversial they might be, for the betterment of our future. We've covered the problems within public education, and we've theorized as to why these problems exist and where they come from. So what now? Now we come up with ideas for solutions. Some suggest teachers take on a larger role in their students' mental health, as well as receive more mental health training. For a quick, easy fix, some suggest having parents take their children out of the public education system entirely. While they're certainly not alone, from 2016 to 2019, homeschooling has grown by 2% to 18%, I still believe that not all hope is lost for public education. Firstly, as stated earlier, We need more and higher quality research dedicated to what we can learn about problems in public education. Secondly, schools could take some funding out of anti-bullying and mental health/emotional health awareness campaigns and start mental emotional health development programs instead. Schools could hire more psychologists to both teach students how to empathize with others and learn how to face and overcome the problems part and parcel of growing up. We were constantly told that it is our job to make the world a better place for our future generations. But have we really done our part? Rising mental illness says otherwise. Should we take the focus off ourselves and place it in the future generations? I believe we will see a great improvement in mental health, cognitive development, and life satisfaction for everyone.